It's time for the start of our webinar. So let's get started. Good day, everybody. Welcome. My name is Mark Shelton, and I am Chair of the Board and Director of Library Services here at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to today's meeting, CRRA members, partners, and friends. We have an outstanding program for today. In addition to our featured speakers, we will recognize outstanding service to CRRA. There are always a few logistics to make today go more smoothly. While I encourage you to freely use chat and Q&A, please put all questions for the speakers into the Q&A. We will only convey questions in the Q&A to the speakers. If a question is for a specific speaker, please include that information with your question. You're welcome to choose whatever screen presentation works best for you. We recommend, however, speaker view in which the speaker is highlighted on your screen along with the PowerPoint slide. And now it's time to invite Jennifer Younger, Executive Director of CRRA, to the microphone to introduce our speakers.
Thanks, Mark. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to see all of some familiar names and faces and some new faces and names. It's my great pleasure today to introduce our speakers. Sister Pat Bergen from the Congregation of St. Joseph in LaGrange, Illinois, and Reverend Abby Mohawk, Green Faith, Abby's in Texas. We're delighted to engage with two individuals who are deeply involved in influencing and changing the ways we live, in exploring and adopting new living routines and interactions with our environment. For over 2 decades, the Congregation of St. Joseph has been expressing and acting on its concern for the ecological and spiritual crises of our times. Founded in 1992, Green Faith works to enable individuals around the world and of multi-faiths to create communities transforming themselves, their spiritual institutions, and society to protect the planet and create a loving and just world. We'll hear from Sister Pat Bergen first, and then Reverend Abby Mohawk, after which I'll be back to moderate the Q&A with our speakers. So welcome to Pat, who will then, after she's finished, pass the microphone to Abby. Thanks very much. Back in a bit.
Thank you. I'm honored to be with you today. Thank you very, very much. If we were together, we would have introduced ourselves as we did on chat, our name and where we're from, and maybe a little bit about our history. And so that's exactly what we did beginning in 1993, when we became aware of the story of the evolving universe. Yes, Teilhard had long before discovered it. Thomas Berry had promoted it. We awakened to it. And in 1993, we began to tell our story through a calendar, which has gone all around the world and has transformed our living. So today we begin in the very heart of God, when love could no longer be contained. And from a single point, light energy came roaring forth. Stimulated by love, the universe billowed out in every direction, creating its own space in which to exist. Yes, that primeval fireball out of every direction, flowing, expanding, receptive to love's inspirations, the first atomic beings were born. Love expressing itself in size, shape. Between spirit and matter, no separation. Stimulated by love and receptive to love over all of cosmic history, the universe has always been moving toward the more, revealing the divine self. St. Bonaventure said, The universe is the very self-expression of God, the divine self, revealing itself in sizes, textures, colors, yes, even species. With each breakthrough of the Holy Spirit of love, more color, more texture, more complexity, yes, even greater consciousness. And out of this meeting, breathing, moving, dancing fabric of life, the first human beings emerged. And the universe for the first time became conscious that it was conscious. Humans interconnected with protons and pulsars, with everything in creation, having oceans in their eyes and stars in their blood. Stimulated by love, humanity began to look about and marvel at all they saw. They learned the secret of every leaf and rock and tree, and their consciousness began its great unfolding. For thousands of years, humanity moved with animals and seasons lightly across the land. They fashioned language and art and cultures elegant in ritual and celebration. For most of human history, our ancestors lived as hunters and gatherers. Some moved with herds, others planted seeds, farmed the land, settled in villages, cities, and nations. If all of history was compressed in 1 year, it would not be till 1 minute to midnight, on the last day of the universe year, that all of the great civilizations, all of ancient history, was only just beginning. Empires and kingdoms grew and spread, seized by listening, discerning love, when all was in place to be a womb strong enough to create, to be the next advance in consciousness. Just over 2,000 years ago, and if all of history was compressed into 1 year, that would be 4 seconds to midnight, Jesus the Christ was born. In Jesus, the universe came to know it was one holy communion. In Jesus the Christ, a sense of self that included the universe was born. Yes, love your neighbor as yourself because your neighbor is yourself. Love God and neighbor because there is no separation. In this divinity, the Christic consciousness, every being would be recognized as a unique epiphany of the divinity. But most of the world did not understand. In a mere 300 years, the scientific phase of human presence, driven by myths of progress and development, is bringing to a close the 65 million year geological era of Earth's greatest variety and abundance to life. Yet, at this tremendous cost and suffering to Earth, scientific probing to the heart of matter and the farthest reaches of space has also uncovered supreme mystery, the nature and story of the emerging interrelated universe that no humans have ever known. We awaken in our time to a universe that is holy. We awaken to the realization that we're participants with the Spirit of the living God in the unfolding of creation. Yes, the universe is continuing its great unfolding, and the place where this evolution is happening fastest is in human consciousness. Right now, it's midnight, and all creations waits. What will the human choose? Will the identity of the human continue to reside in the individual self, or will we answer the call of our time and cross the threshold, surrendering that identity to the universal self? Stimulated by love and receptive to love's inspirations, we're being invited to awaken into the realm of the mystical, where thinking is holistic, structures are global, processes are flowing and ecological, where all is recognized as one communion in God, with God, through God. And to this invitation, we are invited to respond. This was the calendar. This was the story that we began with in 1993. And out of this, we began to announce a vision, a vision that changed the worldview. For a long time, we had lived in this triangular worldview. And this new evolving story of the universe revealed a God that was through all, with all, in all. God within and everything in God. It was this that took us around the United States and Canada and to other countries, announcing to religious congregations of women, bringing their mission into dialogue with the story of the universe, so they could see that it was part of their originating mission. It was with this that after Katrina happened and we lost our mother house, we began to pray. How could this property be used where we no longer had the availability of our mother house? And in that, an architect found us. And he found us with a vision of changing, transforming this property, not into houses that could flood, but into a watershed where water from the canals and from the storms could flow into this land, where the pipes could hold the water in the land, and the levees only reduce the water by 2 inches an hour. And so if the water could be held on this land and be blessed on this land where people had prayed for years, then when the levees went down far enough, the water could flow back into the canals. And this would save 3,780 acres in all directions from flooding, and 6,000 acres in all directions would only flood a little, and 9,000 acres in all directions would have diminished flooding. When it's not raining, this is a beautiful field, a park with playing fields and water swirling through it. This is the vision. In light with the story we were telling ourselves of who we are, who God is, what the world is all about. We made promises when we became a congregation to network with others, to strengthen, heal, and renew earth, to risk our lives and resources for step change, to feed the hungers of the world, and to collaborate with others to transform a global culture of power and privilege to a culture of inclusivity and mutuality. And then the Pope wrote Laudato Si', his encyclical on the care for our common home. With that, we began to look at all kinds of things that were happening in our congregation. We started a sustainability committee. We wrote a policy for our land and buildings. We began to transform to hybrid and electric cars. We looked at our property and realized we had 4 mother houses that were way too big for us. So we began to deconstruct those mother houses. Every part of those buildings went to help build buildings for the poor. We rebuilt these buildings into assisted care facilities according to LEED Gold specifics. And we reduced our carbon emissions from 2012, where there were 34.1 tons per resident, and right now they're 14.1 tons per resident. We came up with a living and working sustainably outline, where we began to look at the food we eat, what we do with our waste, what kinds of products we use. And we made all kinds of decisions of how our living could correspond to the investment we made in our buildings. We now have 3 buildings, partly solared by solar energy, that we monitor and evaluate every single week. When the Pope wrote Laudato Si', for the past 6 years, it's been trying to find a place in the Catholic home. This year, on March 24th, the global church is being invited to make a public proclamation of its willingness to transform to sustainable living in order to evoke the tipping point of climate change within 6 years. We had already done much of the work needed. Now we still have more. So this Laudato Si platform for the whole global church, schools, religious communities, parishes, has a vision, has a process, and a way of being accountable around the globe. It's based on 7 goals: the response to the cry of earth, the cry of the poor, ecological economics, the call to simple living, ecological education, ecological spirituality, and engagement with others in all parts of the world, in hope to transform our planet into being sustainable. The plan involves a public commitment, a transition to integral ecology, the worldview I just showed you, that everything's connected, nothing is separate, and journeying together around the world. So when we sign on to this Laudato Si action platform, we're going to deepen our commitment to Earth through integral ecology as we take more steps to claim our oneness with Earth, to risk and surrender our lives for specific systemic change in collaboration with others, to network with others to bring about a shift in a global culture from institutionalized power and privilege to a culture of inclusivity and mutuality, to recognize that the crisis of humanity and the crisis of Earth are very intertwined. And the emerging worldview of integral ecology, what our calendar announced years ago, impels us towards intentional and fuller way of living and generous promises. And we want to exercise our credibility and moral authority as sisters and associates to stand in solidarity with Earth and all who are oppressed. Taking risks involves giving public voice to systemic injustice. And on May 24th, we will go public with our commitment, our covenant, in proclaiming our participation in this 7-year project of the Catholic Church, hopefully to engage with others to be a tipping point for climate change and the preservation of all species. So with that, I turn it back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Pat. That was truly inspiring. And I imagine we'll have some questions for you in a few minutes. But first, let me turn the microphone over to Abby. Thank you.
And let me get out of the screen share so you can have it. However, I don't seem to be able to get, okay. There.
Well, hi, everyone. Feels like a privilege to be with all of you. Sister Pat is in Northern Illinois, and I am too, actually, right now. I am visiting my parents, and they live in Northern Illinois. So it's good to be together in this way. So again, my name is Abby Mohap, and I am the Director of Education and Training at Green Faith, which is an interfaith environmental and international environmental nonprofit. And we inspire, educate, and organize people of faith all over the world to respond to climate change and environmental injustice. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we do that and invite you to be a part of our work. And as part of that, I want to tell you a little bit about the organization's most recent big event, which was called Sacred People, Sacred Earth, which was a global day of action. And this video does a great job of telling a little bit about who we are around the world. So I'm going to press play, and Jennifer, if you can't hear it, I hope you'll wag your finger at me and I'll unshare my screen and reshare it with sound. So here we are. So that's a little bit about where we've been. And at the end of my presentation to you, I'm going to tell you a little bit about where we can go together. And that was Sacred People, Sacred Earth, which was in March. Whoa. Let's see if I can go. Okay, so Green Faith at its heart has a mission that understands that the earth and all people are sacred and at risk. And so we are building, along with many partners across denominations and religious traditions, a global climate and environmental movement. We create communities that transform ourselves, our institutions, and cultures to protect the planet and to create compassionate justice and love in the world. And we do that envisioning a world transformed. And I'm going to just read verbatim what's on the slide because I think it tells our story so beautifully. We envision a world transformed in which humanity in all its diversity has developed a shared reverence for life on Earth. Religious and spiritual communities everywhere generate a moral awakening to the sacredness of Earth and the dignity of all people. Together, we are building resilient, caring communities and economies that meet everyone's needs and protect the planet. The era of conquest, extraction, and exploitation has given way to cooperation and community. The good life is one of connectedness with each other and with all of nature. It is a world of a flourishing life that replaces despair with joy, scarcity with shared abundance, and privilege with justly distributed power. So our mission and vision is what guides us, and we have a theory of change that helps us live into that mission and vision through living out our values and connecting with people. And so you heard a little bit in our vision that We're committed to individual transformation, so helping people have a smaller carbon footprint, or thinking about how they individually invest and divest around fossil fuels and other environmentally related investment options. We do things around transportation and energy and eating through our Living the Change program. And then also do education with the fellowship program and other eco-theology calls, helping individuals live into who we're meant to be as people of faith. And then we do institutional transformation, working with seminaries around the world, and churches and mosques and synagogues, helping green those institutions and helping them really find alignment between their actions and their faith. And then we work towards systemic transformation, which was part of what our great day of action was to build cultural awareness and to build towards cultural change. And we do all of those three things, building power through local grassroots green faith circles that are committed to 10 demands. And I'll share a little bit more about what those demands are. But we really believe that at the heart of how we change the world to be more compassionate and just is through empowering grassroots leadership and grassroots organizing through green faith circles. And then all of that is really founded and nestled in listening to and working with the most impacted communities, understanding that people who are experiencing the worst parts of climate and environmental injustice have already begun to figure out how to survive and flourish in systems that really weren't of their making. So that's our theory of change. And we do all of that through what's called relational organizing. So we use the snowflake model, which is what this picture is of, where people in the middle are kind of our core lead organizers. And they reach out to other people in other communities, and those people in turn are reaching out and organizing people in their even more local communities. And really that's an engagement of people in the things that matter the most to them as they work around really hyper local issues for their own communities around climate and environmental injustice. So circles exist to create power, or to build power around individual, institutional, and systemic change, building on relationships. And these are some of the ways in which those relationships have been borne out. And some of these are from the Day of Action, but some of these are from regular connection points of people of faith in circles. So people pray together, they act together, they celebrate together, they meet together. So that's how circles emerge. And I said that we are guided together by 10 demands that really help us focus on what we organize and work around, because we all know that climate and environmental injustice is huge, and there's a lot of different facets to be working on. And so we've really focused in on these 10 demands, and I'll share a link to those demands in the chat in just a moment, that really help guide our work. And those 10 demands were decided by our 14 international partners from grassroots leaders of faith who helped us collectively determine what we needed to focus on. And I'll put that link in the chat in just a moment. So why green faith circles? Why do we use this organizational model? First, I think at the heart of it is that we are people of faith first, people of faith and spirit first. And Sister Pat just told a creation story that reminds us that we've always been in relationship with each other and with God and all of creation. And so that's like who we're meant to be, is in relationship with God and each other and all that exists, right? And so green faith circles are a way for us to be in that relationship, to really dig into who we are at our foundation. But then it also builds on the another fact that that the work is lonely and hard, and so it's more fun and easier when you have people around you that you're working together in. And so the first is our ecological biblical faith identity. The second is being in community. And then the third is that we really think power comes from regional knowledge, and that really people, local people solve local problems and are connected then to a global movement. So that's why we do green faith circles. And I want to invite you into the next big thing that we're doing. So I talked about how we do things in individual, institutional, and systemic pieces. And the next thing that we're doing to really push towards systemic change is around some pipeline projects that are going up in Minnesota and along the East Africa corridor. And so we're having an organizing and eco-theology call on May 19. It's the same call, but offered twice because we're an international organization. And it will be led by Bill McKibben as one of the lead speakers to talk to us about fossil fuel infrastructure. And then our colleague, Maren Mara, is going to be the one of the respondents, and she's been an organizer in East Africa around that pipeline. And we're waiting for confirmation on a couple other people. But the call really is about grounding us in our faith and why our faith calls us to do the work, and to ask government leaders to no longer fund pipelines in the US, but all around the world as well. And I'm going to put a link in the chat as an invite for all of you to this great big call. And joining our eco-theology calls is one of the first ways that you get involved with our work. Again, digging into who we are as people of faith. And then at the end of those calls, we always say, okay, how do you want to organize? What kind of work do you want to do? Now that you've claimed your faith a little bit more, knowing that everyone comes to these calls, not as blank slates, but as people with experience, how do you want to live out your faith? How do you want to do that together? And so that's what I have to share with you today. A little bit about who we are, how we organize, and an invitation to join us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abby. It's very, very inspiring as well, in a different way, but wonderful. Before we open the Q&A, I want to thank my program planning partners. Paula Kane, who is the John and Lucine O'Brien Marouse Chair of Contemporary Catholic Studies at the University of Pittsburgh, and a member of CRRA's Scholarly Advisory Committee. Paula is the person who a year ago suggested to me that this would be the year of the environment with celebrations of Earth Day and so on. And this would make a great topic for the annual meeting. So thank you, Paula, for that. The second person is Lisa Gibbon, who's the archivist at the Congregation of St. Joseph of Cleveland, and the immediate past president of the Archivists for Congregations of Women Religious. When we sent out the first announcement about the program, Lisa responded with her ideas, and little did she know, she immediately became part of the program planning committee. But I think you'll agree that Paula and Lisa have done a terrific job in developing the theme and speakers for today. We heard some inspiring yet some practical words of what we as individuals groups can do to move the needle toward living in harmony with creation and the earth. So I'm now opening the floor for Q&A. And so please go ahead and send all your questions in. And in the meantime, I'll start with the first one, which is for Sister Pat. Could you repeat the 7 areas of the Laudato Si Action Platform?
Okay, I think you want the 7 areas of the Laudato Si platform. So I can bring those up again. Perhaps I can't. Okay, they're the cry of the poor, the cry of earth, the ecological finances, economy, ecological education, ecological spirituality, engagement with others around the world. I hope I've named 7.
I have to admit I wasn't counting, but I'll take your word for it.
Okay.
There is a second question for you, and then I have a couple of questions for Abby. You mentioned in regard to the Mirabeau water garden project, that an architect found you. And so could you elaborate a little bit on what those conversations were like with the architect, and how did this evolve then into this extensive project, which has quite an impactful impact on the city of New Orleans?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'd be happy to. One of our younger members was really interested in she lives in New Orleans. So she was very interested in what the city was planning, what ideas were from all different arenas of life for the city that had been totally wrecked during Katrina. And so she happened to be at City Parks where a talk was being given. And she went up to the architect and told him that had he looked at our property on Mirabeau Avenue in New Orleans, and what would he think about that? So he went and looked, and then she actually facilitated the meeting between ourselves and David Wagner. And he presented this vision. And we knew we didn't want houses to be built on this property. So we were praying for some way that this property could serve the people of New Orleans in the same way that our sisters who lived there had formerly served. And so when we heard the description, we knew this was an answer. This design would indeed serve the people of New Orleans in a way far beyond what we ever could have imagined. And not only that, but this design is replicable for every urban area in the world. So with that, we began working with engineers and architects through the aid of David. We worked with him with engineers and architects from the Netherlands and Shanghai, because they know how to manage water. And this picture evolved. And then the plan evolved. And then we had gone to the mayor to see if this plan, this design, could be presented to the US government. They were running a resiliency, I guess you would call it, contest for some money. And the mayor was doubtful. But anyway, David turned it in. And so one day, a very sunny day, we were able to stand at a public proclamation on this property and hand Mayor Landrieu $143 million for resiliency in New Orleans, and Governor Bell Edwards a check for $93 billion. It's not for us, it's for the city of New Orleans and for the state of Louisiana. So that's kind of how our conversations evolved. Does that help?
And that's an amazing story. And the amount of money is actually quite staggering, although
Yes, it is.
I loved what you said about the fact that this is replicable in other urban areas. But one more question there. Have you been back to see it, either when it's not flooding or when it's flooded?
I've been back to see it. It's not finished yet. We have collected the money so that indeed ground can be broken. And it was put on a stall because mayors changed. And we are told right now that bids have been sent out and the groundbreaking is supposed to happen in August. So we're very much eager to have that happen. So at
And-
present, there's nothing to see.
Okay, well, I have just one more follow-up question on this that has come in on the chat. When do you think, when is the project going to be complete? And so far, what's the response of the neighbors to the project, to the community, and to the city at large? Because when you mentioned that 9,000 acres of land will see diminished flooding, that's a lot of territory.
Yes, it is a lot of territory. So the time has really given us the opportunity to talk a lot with the neighbors, to talk a lot with the city of New Orleans, to talk a lot with the business world of New Orleans. And we have very positive feedback, as well as the educational field of New Orleans, because we want to get the partnership of some educational institution in New Orleans to host a building where people could come from all around the world to learn how to do this so that it can be produced around the world. So, and there's interest in this. And maybe now that the world's opening up again after COVID, they'll be more interested.
I'd like to think that one of the Catholic universities in New Orleans would jump at the chance to host a program around this education, exhibits, etc. But I know there will be others with interest too, the city, for example, and other religious groups will be interested. Well, I want to shift now to asking a question of Abby. And here's the first question that's come in, Abby. How large is Green Faith? And you talked a little bit about the scope. So where have you seen the most success in your work? And what do you see? This is a multi-part question, as you can see. And what are the biggest challenges that your organization faces? And then circling back, and I can repeat all these different pieces for you.
Hang it down.
How does that relate to the scope of your organization? Do successes and challenges tend to modify scope or increase effort in particular areas, or how does that all work?
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So I'll be happy to repeat any of that as you go through.
Sure. How big we are is such an interesting question, because I don't know how to answer that, because we have about 20 people on staff around the world in a variety of capacities. But we are organizing circles all over the world, and so those circles count too. We have 60 people in our current class of the fellowship program, and 200 people in the past, and the fellowship program is a year-long commitment. We're connected to about 20 seminaries around the world. The event that we coordinated with our partners around the world in March impacted about, I would say, several million people. So, and we're able to do that with such small staff. numbers because of that snowflake model, where there's people in the middle doing work, but also like working out this way, right? And so everybody has a role and a task. So that's a little bit why it's complicated, and how big are we, right? Okay, so challenges and successes.
Success.
Yeah. So we've had
But before you go on, are any of the seminaries in the US? And do you specifically reach out to them, or do they reach out to you?
both. I would say about half, 2/3 of the seminaries are in the US. And for a while, we had a program that was specifically targeted at seminaries. And so we had these deep relationships with 11 seminaries, all in the US, but 10 in the US and 1 in Costa Rica. And we've expanded now into more schools in Latin America, and then several on the continent of Africa. And we're always looking for more seminaries to interact with, or places of higher education around theological education. Okay, successes. Okay, so we have had a ton of success, particularly around fossil financing for fossil fuels, and have been a part of a global movement around divestment from fossil fuels. We've had a lot of success, and so that's a global success that we've had in New Jersey as an example of a more local success. We've successfully kept new fossil fuel projects from being started in New Jersey. Yeah, we just supported a seminary kind of rehauling their entire curriculum in order to be more environmentally friendly. And I think this day of action was particularly successful, getting over 400 events in over 40 countries. So those are some of our pretty recent successes. I think our challenges, and all of that is really based in how people of faith have moral power in the world, and can organize people to respond to the needs in their particular communities. We're really building on generations upon generations of people of faith organizing in social movements. I think some of our challenges are around how big the problem is. We know that climate change and environmental injustices are pretty insidious and everywhere. We also face the intersection of those issues with things like racism and sexism and homophobia and classism and colonization, that those all they all work together to squash God's vision of a beautiful and compassionate and just world. And that's a real challenge when so much of the world is set up to divide us and hurt other people. We're trying to build together a world that's better for everyone. I think we have challenges around people of faith feeling like environmental work is too political. We have challenges around working with communities that don't see women and people of color as being worthy of being in leadership, at all. We have technological challenges, right? We're organizing with people in subsistence communities sometimes, and so we've had to figure out creative ways to be connected. Yeah, those are some of the challenges that come up for me. And I think what it what it reminds us in terms of relation to scope, and then I think I'm gonna stop answering this question, though I feel very proud of remembering all 4 parts of this question. I think what it reminds us is, Oscar Romero wrote, when he was alive and working, that this is what he said. One of his prayers was that it helps now and then to step back and take a long view. The kingdom of God is not only beyond our efforts, it is even beyond our vision, that we alone can accomplish in our lifetime only a tiny fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is God's work. Nothing we do is complete, which is a way of saying that the kingdom always lies beyond us. And ultimately, he says that we are prophets of a future that is not our own, it's God's. And so when the world and the challenge feels too big, to us, it's a reminder that we do it as people of faith. That's something that is bigger than what we are alone. And it's a commitment then to say, okay, the work's never going to be done. We don't do it by ourselves.
I have just one follow-up to that, and then I have some questions for Sister Pat. So I'm going to ask my question now for Abby. The question is, not all Christians, especially evangelical Christians, consider climate change and pollution to be serious issues. Do you have a strategy to reach out to people of faith who are resistant to your values and goals?
And I think this answer might surprise you, Dan, but sort of our strategy is that we don't organize those people. It's really hard to convince people to change their mind. And in like the organizing world, we talk about how people either severely disagree with you, or they severely agree with you, or they're kind of in the middle. And our real group of people that we organize is in the middle. People who are who probably agree, but who don't know enough, right? Or who are waiting to be organized. And we just kind of ignore all these people who are going to push back, or who are clearly against us, right? Not because they don't deserve the conversation or the organizing, but because there's so many people here that we can focus on this group of people. So, and that might be a surprising answer, but it also means that we have enough to do all the time. And I'll just say one other thing and then I'll be done. I'm a progressive Presbyterian pastor who serves a congregation when I'm not at Green Faith in Texas. And we're a congregation that's not all of one mind. And that feels like a real privilege, to be able to sit with some Christians who think that my work is too political or doesn't matter. And so that's the place where I go and say more about how we don't agree. Let's dig in. So I really don't mean to say we totally throw these people away and say they don't matter. I really mean to say in our work, this is what we do. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, that was a fascinating question. I expect many of us have that question. A couple of questions for Pat. How do you advocate for some advice, how to advocate for some common sense changes in our society to fight global warming? Specifically, for example, in countries like Canada, where the traffic lights are designed to turn red only if they sense pedestrians crossing the road, which reduces the traffic and consumption of fuel and electricity for electric vehicles, but fuel for all cars, obviously. Thousands of empty buildings in the US, including those under construction, are required to keep their lights on at night, while the electric wiring code in most of them does not allow for turning off the lights completely. And her last issue is that most of the houses in the US are built with lumber and tar-based roofs. Both materials are not long-lasting and contribute to deforestation. On the contrary, brick, concrete, and cement are not only abundant in nature, but result in much more durable and long-lasting buildings. So again, here's a very long question with some specific issues, but I think the question is really, how do you advocate for common sense changes in our society to fight global warming, such as around these particular issues as examples?
So those are great questions, and wouldn't we all love to be able to address them and transform people's minds instantly? I think this is why it is so important to reach out to people in every single discipline, the building, the architects, the engineers, the artists, the electricians, in every single discipline, and help them to get, first of all, in contact with their very experience of God. Everybody has had a religious experience that includes all of creation sometime in their life. They might have forgotten it instantly, but if we can help people get in contact with their primary experience of God, then it can begin to make sense to people. The story that I told you of the evolution and interconnected universe that's still emerging. So that would be primary to help people, because then, in light of their own discipline, they can begin to see implications. You can begin to see that deforestation is simply not a winner if we want the planet to go on. We have to get into our schools this worldview. We have to start talking from our pulpits about care of creation and what that implies for the sacredness of the trees, the sacredness of everything. But when people begin to realize that, then it becomes horrible for them personally to cut down a tree. When we begin to see the gift of tree, they make oxygen. I can't do that. If we deforest the planet, the first species to go out of existence is ourselves. So it's so important that every teacher, every preacher, every parent know the story that connects with their primary experience of the divine. And they begin to see how we have those experiences, and instantly the culture seduces us into some other story, some other way of behavior. So the more we can transform the culture, the more that culture is to behavior like genes, Genes, are to cells. So the more the culture begins to change, the more electricians and builders and architects and engineers begin to think differently. And the more that we can get them to behave, to decide out of their experience of the divine, the more they affect the culture. I mean, why did we change to LEED code building? Because some people woke up in that field. I don't know if that helps. I don't particularly know the exact thing to do about lighting and about building. I agree with the writer of the question. It's important that we begin to help people in our legislatures understand this worldview. And right now in the United States is an important time because there is a real capacity to shift how we do things in the US regarding our living in harmony with all creation.
Thank you. Thank you. That the speaking to the general strategy was helpful, really good. Abby, I saw you nodding. Did you want to add anything to that?
I mean, I just, so my first gig at Green Faith was around helping seminaries get like a sort of LEED certified. So when Sister Pat is talking about LEED certification, and I just was like, yes, that's right, that's right. And you know, it's not the only thing you should or can do, but like I think there's so many things that we can do in our buildings that just make it better. And I don't know, Sister Pat, I'm going to be carrying around the image of what the architect created with me, and just like how the spaces that we live in and worship in affect the places that we call home.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just going to be thinking about that for a while. And I'm also going to be thinking about HVACs, because now like it's so fun to think about that kind of thing too. So yeah.
I think we can't forget the power we have as individuals. Like if I'm reconstructing my home, I'm meeting with contractors. What am I bringing up to them? What questions am I bringing up that can change their minds about what they do? What information can I give? I'm meeting with plumbers. What questions can I ask? I'm meeting with all medical people. Think of the people you meet. What questions do you ask in order to ignite in them different awarenesses of how they can decide and do their practice to be more sustainable?
But so that's like not, so it starts as a personal practice, but it really like then like blossoms out into this like potential systemic change, right? Because if you change
Exactly.
ways,
Exactly.
yeah.
Everybody has the power to change a system, because every decision we make affects every galaxy forever. And every word we say affects every galaxy forever. You can never take it back. May it be life-giving and good.
Amen. Amen.
So
Amen.
that raises, while we wait for Jennifer to return, so that raises the question, because clearly you've touched on some extremely large issues, yet for the individual, there's this question of the day-to-day life and how they make personal changes. And yet you indicate the individual can bring information when they discuss these things with the people they interact with.
Right.
How and where do you get the information that you utilize to best inform? And what do you recommend as far as where other people on an individual basis and thinking about their day-to-day life, where should they also go to find good, useful, accurate information that they can employ on a day-to-day basis?
So I think academically, there are a number of programs that academics are privy to find that talk out of a worldview of an interconnected, emerging sacred universe. So that's one place. 350.org is another place. I think faith organizations like Green Faith, I think you've got information that people can find. You might want to add to this, Abby.
I was just going to put Rosemary Radford Ruther into the chat as a Catholic teacher and theologian who's done a lot around the academy.
Right.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Johnson regarding worldview. She's the sister of Saint Joseph.
Ivan Gabata, who's in Brazil.
Right.
Yeah. So many.
There are all kinds, if you Google information on finance out of an interconnected emerging universe, there'll be books that show up and authors that show up. Architecture that's sustainable. Really Google, go to a place, you'll find lots of books, lots of authors, lots of speakers.
Thank you. I'll jump back in with thanks to Mark. This is when it really is wonderful to be part of a team. My battery ran out, unbelievable. At any rate, thank you, Mark, and for carrying on and handling the questions. The last question, which I didn't quite hear, but when I hear you talking about where do you get information and speakers, I'm reminded that in putting this program together, we had help from another person, Brian Rowe, who is the environmental correspondent at the National Catholic Reporter. And he is, when I talked with him, he was very generous. He knows a lot because, of course, he covers the environment for the National Catholic Reporter. And so could talk about organizations and people that he's interviewed in the past and was a big source. And so I should have mentioned him earlier in my thanks for the program group putting it together. Brian was an unwitting, shall we say, part of our program committee, but putting us in touch certainly with Green Faith. And Lisa, of course, knew about the Sisters of St. Joseph. But there is two more questions that emerged before I turn it over to Mark. We have just a few minutes left. For Abby, how do you work with the individual circles? And for Pat, how difficult were the changes that the Sisters of St. Joseph made in their own lives? So if one of you wants to start first, that's great.
I train all of the circle leaders. So that's one way that we work with them. And then we coach the circle leaders. Then all of the circles, the circle leaders are connected to a paid organizer on our team that coaches them and supports them. And then we're beginning to launch conversations for the circle participants to be in person or to be online together. And we hope to be able to be in person someday together.
And the question you asked me was, how difficult were these changes? So we did quite a bit of education first. So that helped. We did not only education, but as I talked about before, inviting people to get in touch with their primary experiences of the divine and doing that education. So some and we have a number of people who were on board. So as they began giving talks and developing processes and all that, more and more people came on board. So that part was very important to initiating big changes. But I have to tell you, when it comes down to personal life, there's resistance because people like it the way it is. You know, they're comfortable with the way it is. So it takes challenge with compassion. It takes asking people, well, tell me why? What is it that that you feel that this other way is so very, talk to me about it. And sometimes when people are listened to and ask questions that help them keep on going deeper and deeper and deeper, that and enough invites their transformation.
Thank you. Well, I think it is in fact difficult for all of us to make changes in the ways that we live. And that your point about the education and the process is really very important. And I think fits in with what Abby said about the organizing. The circles really need the support of each other over time as they work within individual circles. Well, with that, I have to thank our speakers one more time and bring the Q&A to a close and turn the microphone back over to Mark Shelton. So thank you very much, Abby. Thank you very much, Pat. This has been inspiring and educational. Thank you.
You for the invitation. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Blessings on your work.
I also want to take a minute and say thank you to both of you and to also Jennifer for this wonderful session and this opportunity to listen to the work, discuss these issues, and have this nice open conversation. So we move on to what is a really wonderful part of our program, our awards and recognition segment. Volunteer recognition is something I look forward to all year long. Our members and partners are the lifeblood of CRRA. But before we get to our volunteers, I want to mention the fact that CRRA has also been honored to receive the Argentamento Award, which recognizes contributions made to the renewal of parish and community life in the spirit of St. John the 23rd, remembered especially for convening the Second Vatican Council. In accepting the award on our behalf, Pat Lawton and Jennifer Younger cast our work in his spirit. Consult not your fears, but your hopes and dreams. And that's what we in CRRA did. We started with a clear mission, and with that always in mind, developed the resources we know today as the Catholic Portal, the Catholic News Archive, subject guides, other resources, and programming. In real life, it isn't a guarantee that if you build it, they will come. In other contexts, the Argentamento Award is deeply rewarding for the recognition that CRRA resources are useful and valuable to the renewal of parish and community life. The award is a fitting tribute to the leadership and participation of members and partners, and I'm pleased to recognize all of us today. Pat Lawton. Pat started, coordinated, collaborated, completed, and/or communicated many projects, included documentation, surveys, reports, website pages, the first strategic plan, symposiums, annual meetings, and the newsletter. She hired our first webmaster and data analyst, practicum students, and the Catholic News Archive project manager, wrote announcements for other professional association newsletters, and started the CRRA corner in the Catholic library world. She worked closely with numerous committees and task forces, assisting them in defining our resources, such as the portal and the Catholic News Archive. In short, if we did it, Pat was involved. And she did all this with a generous use of questions to understand what others were thinking, grace, and cheer. We reached out and asked committee chairs for their thoughts. Here are some of the excerpts from their tributes to Pat. She has a gift for understanding people and helping them. She had thoughtful, constructive comments to offer during our meetings. I truly felt supported by her and felt that she believed in my ability as chair. She helped bring all the different parts of CRRA together and keep them apprised of each other's activities. I remember hearing a presentation by Pat at the ATLA annual conference and coming away with the feeling that my small library could actually do a digitization project. Pat is retiring this year. While we will miss her, her positive impact will be with us for many years to come. She was a big part of realizing our dreams as well as our desire to be a member-governed organization. She inspired us to see it really could be done. We are grateful for her work in creating a strong foundation on which to move into the future. Thank you, Pat. And she is here, or should be here, to say a comment.
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mark, thank you. Just a very quick, I'm very humbled, very touched by the comments. It's been really one of the great joys of my life doing this with CRRA and meeting all these lovely people. And I want to special shout out to Jennifer, who's been my partner in crime. And anyway, I look forward to volunteering, really volunteering in post-retirement. So thank you. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you, Pat. So the work that Pat has done has been significant, but we also want to recognize our top 5 text correctors. So in no small part, these people have contributed significantly to the work that we do. Text correctors are often the unsung heroes, yet their work is crucial to improving the quality of a database. For various reasons, scanned images may not be crisp. The OCR process, which generates the searchable text, may then contain spelling errors, thus negatively impacting search results. And as librarians, we know how important that is. In doing their research in the Catholic News Archive, Kevin, Karen, and Noel, or Noel, I apologize if it's Noel, not Noel, have taken time to correct mistakes, and we are grateful for their contribution. This isn't all they do, however. Kevin has created finding aids to almost 150 religious congregation archive collections for the portal. Karen was the prime mover in digitizing 30 years of the Hartford, Connecticut Catholic newspaper. Noel inspired the directory of Catholic newspapers online with links to over 200 papers, another CRRA resource freely available to all. In addition to them, there is an addition 52 users have corrected 95,000 lines of text. Some of these users are CRRA members, but not all. We know only the names they give us to set up their user account. Nevertheless, we appreciate their work and presume they too feel it is beneficial to their research as well as to the archive. So thank you to them and their contribution. All right. I think that we need to take a moment and recognize Jennifer Younger. Jennifer Younger is retiring. Like Pat, after years of serving our organization with distinction for over 10 years. Jennifer will be greatly missed by all of us. Jennifer's exceptional service became formal in 2010. She took on the role as executive director after serving as the Edward H. Arnold Director of Hesburgh Libraries at the University of Notre Dame in Notre Dame, Indiana. Since then, Jennifer led CRRA in expanding our potential through membership growth and diversification, incorporation, strategic planning, pursuing grants, and the development of highly valued and regularly consulted resources. Together, we have accomplished more than any of us could have done on our own. Choosing not to be an island, Jennifer collaborated with professional associations such as the Catholic Library Association, ATLA, and the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities, as well as Catholic newspaper publishers. She engaged with members to hold symposiums and annual meetings on their campuses. These events brought together CRRA members, partners, scholars, as well as librarians and archivists from other institutions. So critical in her view to building community among those with shared interests. Whether opening doors for new opportunities, developing programs, supporting committees, or talking with members, she was fully engaged in listening, learning, and taking action. She brought boundless enthusiasm and energy to all that she did. She was always looking ahead and around the curves to see what might be ahead, what could we contribute, and what would we gain were favorite questions. She has an extraordinary ability to coordinate many moving parts and when to call on experts for help. She has been an extraordinary colleague, and her work will continue to benefit CRRA and its members long after she also has moved on to other interesting endeavors. It is our hope to find a person who sees the vision of CRRA and is able to build on the extraordinary work already done. We are grateful to Jennifer for all that she has accomplished. So let me turn the mic over to Jennifer, as I know she has a few comments she would also like to make.
Thanks, Mark. Well, when I accepted the offer from my board colleagues in 2010, I had the benefit of having been one of the founding members of CRRA. While it would be nice to say I knew what I was getting into, the truth is I did not. Our group of 8 Catholic academic libraries had stated our mission very clearly. We had set up bylaws and committees. The Catholic portal was operational, and we had hired Pat, my partner in crime. But I had never been involved in a nonprofit that was not associated with a parent university. And so for me, this was a scary time. We had big ambitions, which, although we had a clear mission, our big ambitions unfolded only over time. For me, it was a time to grow professionally, learn to meet new challenges, and at the same time, learn how not to become overwhelmed with all of the opportunities and all of the challenges that we could have run into. Thankfully, I had the best colleagues and friends I could ever have imagined. You, the partners and friends of CRRA. I'm honored to have the opportunity to serve. I think we've made a big impact in supporting teaching, learning, and scholarship around the world. Some of that we learned from the statistics we get about the use of the portal, the subject guides, the directory of Catholic newspapers online, and the Catholic News Archive. It's been a wonderful time, filled with some stress, yes, indeed, but it's been wonderful on the whole. And I will greatly miss the interactions I have on a regular basis with friends and colleagues. The good news is, in my view, that I'm retiring from my job as executive director. I'm not disappearing. And I will be supporting CRRA, although in a new role, that of volunteer. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate all the good words, and I look forward to seeing you all in the future. Thank you so much.
And just as a note, the search for a new executive director is underway, and we hope to bring someone on board who will carry on the excellent work that Jennifer has done and continue to help and build CRRA going into the future. Moving on, it's important to recognize others as well. In addition to Pat and Jennifer, we depend on the expertise of Todd Jensen, who is an outstanding manager of digitization workflows, technical issues, and vendor relations for the Catholic News Archive. Similarly, we rely on Laura Lyman's outstanding skills and experience in managing our website, administration, communication, and financial activities. Her expertise in managing other nonprofit associations and ability to draw on the full range of experts at Capitol Hill Management Services Incorporated ensure our operations are sound and our resources well presented. As I've mentioned, we are a member governed in the best way. The board and committees set strategic directions, goals, annual priorities, and broad policies, and ensure that we align our goals to the extent possible to support those of members and partners. Joining a CRRA committee or the board is an opportunity for professional development, an opportunity to expand your leadership skills and network of expert colleagues. It's easy, it's enjoyable, and I encourage your participation. You can go to our website and volunteer for a specific committee, send an email to Laura Lyman, Association Manager, or say, yes, contact me via the poll that you see in front of you now. I hope to hear from you and to join you in the work of the organization. So we'll just leave the poll up for just a second. In the end, I do want to say thank you. We've come to the end of the program. We hope you learned something from our presenters and about the organization. We hope you've learned something new, enjoyed the program, and we thank you for spending part of your day with us. Thank you for joining us today.